Welcome to the DFS Build MLB edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We are ready to rock and roll and cover this 12-game slate. We're going to switch up the format just a little bit. First, we're going to dive into the pitchers that we really like and also probably touch on the ones we will not be playing. And then we'll look at the stacks, the ownership, and just kind of gauge which stacks we really like on this massive 12-game slate. Before we get into it, I do want to point out that this video is sponsored by DFS Hero. If you are in the search for a lineup optimizer / tool to help you win, they are a good one to try. You can get 15% off using our link in the video description below. If this video helps you in any way, please give it a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Doing both those things honestly helps us out quite a bit. Lets us know we're doing something right, we're helping you out, and it also helps the community grow. So let's get right into it, Taylor. You had noted right before I pushed record here that this slate feels wide open, and that kind of makes you feel pretty good. And I kind of agree with that because if you look at the stack IQ real quick before we dive in, nobody's even above 7% owned for the stack percentage. So it's wide open, man.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing a little bit in that way, just because there's not an obvious top spot. I do think that makes it better, though. If you're fading the chalkiest offense, it's not going to be that chalky, so it's not something that's all that scary. And if that top offense goes off, you're not completely dead if you faded them. Like if it's a 40% owned team in Coors or something that scores 15 runs and you don't stack that team, you're toast already. So yeah, there are a lot of ways to go. It's not very clear, but there are still worth targeting in some spots that might not look great, but be lower as a result.
Yeah, just to name the stack that you're kind of referring to, San Diego Padres are coming in as the chalkiest stack, but basically what you're suggesting here is obviously we can eat that chalk and not at all worry about the ownership whatsoever, but also I don't think they're a standout stack as much as the slate is indicating. I mean, they are in a good spot. Dakota Hudson isn't good, but you can definitely fade them on this slate. It's like you said, they're not in like an amazing park. And it's not like Dakota Hudson he's actually like that working out as the guy to target a lot this year for some reason.
He's just a ground ball guy. Like he doesn't miss bats, but he's also not getting completely blown up. And it is one of the more pitcher-friendly parks on the slate. So if they're going to be chalk, that's something that I'm going to completely ignore and just probably not play them at all.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of pitching, let's start there. I got the pitching tab open here at DFS Hero. Right now, we're looking at the pitchers with the best projections. Yoshi Yamamoto is coming in with 18.89. He's in the optimal lineup 17% of the time, which isn't great because he is pretty pricey. Hefty 10.5K. I mean, against the Giants at Oracle Park, I do actually like him quite a bit, especially with no expensive stacks screaming out to me. I don't see a problem with just going and getting him and then figuring the rest out. How about you?
Yeah, I'll be getting to him plenty. Like you said, the expensive bats don't stand out big time. There are still some stacks that are priced up that are worth paying for, I think, on occasion. But obviously, if you play Yamamoto, you're going to have to find something cheaper. There is enough of that out here. A team like Washington, I've seen is pulling a lot of ownership too, and they're pretty cheap. We can touch on them with stacks, but yeah, it's pretty easy to get him even at 10.5. Like there's also cheap pitching. We'll get to Vasquez, I'm sure, and really nobody but Yamamoto is priced up. So yeah, I see no qualms with getting there. Good park, good matchup. Probably the most talented pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, and right behind him, as far as projection goes, is the uber chalky George Kirby. He's coming in at 24% owned. Right now, he is the chalkiest pitcher on the slate. Let me just double check that. 24.78% at TFS Hero. And he is actually coming into the optimal 38% of the time. Obviously, he's a good amount cheaper than Yamamoto, so that makes good sense. I am a little bit leery of this chalk, though, because he did get his ass kicked by the Twins last time out. Gave up 3 dongs. Also, the Royals are not a bad team. That's a good offense who does not strike out a ton. I believe the projected lineup's coming in at 20%, which is not exactly mouthwatering. And they also have a lot of power. So I don't necessarily want to stack against Kirby, but I think I might end up being a little bit underweight. And I think it's not really leverage because Yamamoto is still coming in like with the same amount of ownership. But I would rather pay the 1.5 extra than pay for Kirby on this slate personally.
I kind of feel the opposite. I think the savings are worth it. Just 9K is pretty cheap for what Kirby brings to the table. It is not a good spot. It's a good park, but it's not a good matchup against KC. Pretty average strikeout lineup, actually below average this season. Decent amount of power, but he's good. I think his numbers are a bit unlucky so far. I think overall he's probably the SP1A behind Yamamoto in terms of talent. So I'll get there. I think it's mainly that there are pitchers in better matchups, but they're not as good as Kirby.
Yeah.
Guys like Singer, Arrighetti, Minaya, etc. So I think Kirby feels relatively safe. He projects slightly better than Yamamoto from a median standpoint from what I'm looking at. So yeah, I'll be getting there quite a bit, even at ownership. I don't think it's a big deal. I think he's a great play.
Yeah, I mean, when you factor in price, he is technically the much better play because he's 1.5K cheaper and he basically has the same projection. So I hear that for sure, especially when they're going to be the same ownership. I do wonder if that fluctuates a little bit, though, because he's a lot less expensive. Maybe he carries more ownership and Yamamoto flies a little bit under the radar due to price. But either way, I do prefer him. I don't think I'd really go crazy with the Royals here. I think I would just gain leverage by fading Kirby, and that's
yeah. I don't think you have to play against him. You can just fade him in order to do that.
Yep. So Brady Singer on the other side is not as safe, but I actually like him a little bit at 8.8K because the Mariners strike out a shit ton. So that's probably where I'm at with that. I'm not like racing to go get him, but his numbers look good on the year, and they strike out at a 27% clip. Again, same deal with KC, but obviously they strike out way more. They do have a little bit of power, or a lot of bit of power. 183 collective ISO against righties. So yeah, the K matchup is good though. So I'm fine with kind of having him be like a little bit of a pivot on Kirby if you want to. I'm personally not getting there a ton, but I think he's totally fine.
Yeah, he looks pretty outstanding. His numbers overall are very good. 25, like the same strikeout rate as Kirby, essentially. Control isn't as good. Ground balls are better, though. And same good part Kirby's pitching in. And you mentioned Seattle's strikeouts are just out of control. 29% this season against righties for that projected lineup. Let's see. 4 lefties in the projected Seattle lineup, too, so not too many. He's generally better against righties, and he'll face 5 of them, it sounds like, tonight. For 8.8, he's a little pricey,
right,
relative to who he's been historically, but maybe not this version of him. And in this matchup, I would say he's not overpriced for the slate. Looks like the ownership's going to be there on him, though, too, so it's not like he's flying under the radar.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really just a price thing. I mean, when you look at his 169 ISO allowed against lefties, I feel like that would be a lot more problematic if he was facing more lefties tonight and if he was facing better lefties. Like Josh Rojas is one of the lefties. That's not very scary. He is facing a couple good ones. But so basically, if he's facing 4 lefties, I think 3 of them are ones we would maybe worry about a little bit here. But yeah, he's definitely in play, just not grading out as like a top 3 option for me. So Christopher Sanchez comes in here with the 4th best projection. He's facing the Mets. I guess he's okay. He's not really on my radar. If I'm looking at the projection, I'm really just dropping down to Randy Vasquez because he's 6K and he's about the same projection wise, and he gets to face the Rockies. So his numbers are a little bit dicey, but the Rockies are not good and they are not in Coors. So I'm kind of just going to lean on the fact that he doesn't have to face a lot. Like lefties who are getting him right now. 500 ISO, only 11% whip rate against lefties on the year. Very, very small sample size. But if you look at last year, 12% K rate against lefties, 221 ISO allowed. So obviously lefties are getting to him over the past 2 years, but they don't have a ton of lefties to be afraid of. Ryan McMahon and Charlie Blackmon, and that's kind of it.
They're the only ones that I see in the projected lineup. So he's facing a sea of righties, and they're bad.
Right, and he's been crushing righties, at least this year for sure. And last year has been pretty good too. So 26% K rate last year against righties and 25 this year. He's not walking anybody from either side of the plate either. So as long as he gets around Charlie and Ryan McMahon, okay, he's probably going to have a really good night. So at 6K flat, I don't really care about ownership or any potential risk. I'm kind of locking him in. I like him a lot.
Yeah, it's disconcerting to see a guy like that that's probably going to be the chalkiest pitcher on the slate, but it makes a lot of sense. The lineup is striking out a ton. Like Tovar, Bouchard, Doyle, Goodman, and Beck all have 30+% K rates against righties this season. McMahon 27%. The only low strikeout hitters are Diaz and Blackman. So really not an imposing group. Good park. The salary is what really makes the difference, though. Like at 6K, even at chalk, if he fails, then yeah, you're going down with a lot of the field, but it's also not hurting you necessarily as much since he's 6K, and you're hoping that your expensive SP1 or your more expensive bats can carry you beyond that. But for the dollar, he's very obviously the best value on the board.
Yeah, 100%. I think also what you want to do with him does correlate quite a bit with what you do with your stacks. Like if you really want to pay up for your stacks, he makes complete sense to use and just eat that chalk and, like you said, get different in other ways. But yeah, I don't see much reason to get away from him unless you're like really, really high on like an athletic stack or something. And then
like I think that's viable though. Like there are cheap stacks. You can make Kirby Yamamoto work, Singer as well. It's a big enough slate to where there are many different ways to build. So that's kind of why it seems like a pretty fun slate.
Yeah. Those guys up top are carrying quite a bit of ownership, so that might not even necessarily be like a super contrarian route to take. To like just go pay for Yamamoto and Kirby or something. But I think it's split enough that again, it doesn't really matter that much. I just would obviously not play the Padres necessarily. Not really interested in Shota Imanaga. He's a good pitcher, but I don't want to have a guy against the Braves. Zach Eflin at Fenway, no thanks. Obviously, Boston can be had, but not super interested in that. Wind's blowing out too, so it's not helpful. Sean Manaea against the Phillies, not super into that. And Ronaldo Lopez against the Cubs. I think that's okay, but I'm not super interested in that 9.7K salary. So as far as those guys that I just grouped together there, is anybody there that stands out for you that you're going to play tonight?
Manaea 7-2, like the Phillies lineup without Trey Turner is not amazing. There are some strikeouts there too. He's not a very good pitcher in the first place. Like he's pretty average himself, but for the dollar, I think he's okay. You mentioned Sanchez earlier for 7-9. He's cheap enough to where I think you can target him too. The Mets, like he's a ground ball guy. The Mets are a fly ball hitting team, so it's not an ideal spot, but good park. And Sanchez himself is fine enough. I don't mind him. You didn't mention him, but Spencer Arrighetti looks like he's getting some ownership for the Astros against Oakland. Oakland strikes out a lot, but it's really not a bad lineup. They have hit for quite a bit of power against righties this season. They get a park boost going into Houston too. Arrighetti projects fine for 7-2. Like I think he's an okay tournament play, but if he is going to be owned on this slate, it looks like I'm going to be getting to a lot more Oakland than Arrighetti.
Yeah. I joked about the Athletics before, but I think that is a viable strategy for sure. They actually have underrated power, and at least this year so far, it's really all we have to go on is he's giving up a 308 ISO against righties. So, I mean, Brent Rooker alone as a one-off is pretty interesting. Langoliers is pretty interesting. So, I mean, you can fire up a full stack if he's going to carry like 10+% ownership. I'm okay with that. It's just going to, or even like a secondary stack, 3 guys in there, probably favor the righties, but I mean, I think we can get to him either way. Yeah, you mentioned who the Phillies pitcher, Chris Sanchez. Only problem with that game, though, is the winds are blowing out up to 15 miles per hour, so that might be a problem for the pitching. So that would be the main reason why I might shy away from those guys. As far as the other guys here, we know how fun it is to roster Tanner Bybee. He's been an ass in our craw here. It hasn't been fun rostering him whatsoever. All these other guys just look just so dicey that's not even worth it. Ross Stripling against Astros, no. Dakota Hudson against the Padres, no. Now, like the way I get different there is just not stack those chalky offenses, I guess. I don't want these pitchers, though. Matthew Liberatore against the I actually like the Halos a little bit, and we'll get into that. But technically speaking, I think that's possibly a good strikeout matchup. Actually, no, it's not. Not that good. But anyways, I'm not seeing anything down here that really calls to me. I think I moved past him. I think the only other guy would have been Mitch Keller, maybe. He's a little bit pricey when you factor in that the Brewers do have some pop and it is a hitter's park. But 22% whiff rate against righties. And they have 1, 2, 3 possible. Well, I guess we'll have 3 lefties. No, 4 lefties, and he has had issues against lefties. So you can kind of go either way on that. I like the Brewers a little bit, but Mitch Keller is probably the last high dollar pitcher that is a little bit appealing to me.
Yeah, I don't really see the need, just because he's more expensive than Kirby and Singer at the top. Don't really love it. Eflin, I guess you can make a case for 1,000 less, but not loving the Fenway thing for him. Jose Soriano, just because the Cardinals are kind of ass, I don't think is a terrible play. He's a decent strikeout pitcher, but he's also walking a ton of guys, and I think St. Louis is probably better than they've performed so far. So not inclined to really pick on them with him specifically. So I'm probably not really casting a wide net with pitching. I think I'm just going to be mostly on Kirby, Yamamoto, Vasquez, and Singer with a dusting of Minaya, Sanchez, and maybe some Arrighetti.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I'm looking at Mitch as more of a tourney, very low sprinkling pivot off of the chalky Kirby and Singer plays. That's where I'm at with that. All right, let's head over to the Stack IQ at DFS Hero and talk about some of these chalky stacks and how we might feel about them. Obviously, we talked about the Padres as the chalk right now. I don't know how concrete that's actually going to be because, like you said, it's so wide open that what we're projecting here might be inaccurate. It just might not be. They might not be the stack when it's all said and done. But either way, you could go either way. I think Hudson's guy you can attack. He's been giving up runs. Like you said, he's a ground ball pitcher, so it's not really the best spot. It is a pitcher's park. So right off the bat, I think you can play the Padres. There's nothing wrong with them. They look good in a vacuum. But because they're profiling as the chalky stack, I am just out on a 12-game slate.
Yeah, I just, like I said before, a ground ball guy. It's kind of a ground ball heavy team, too. They're not hitting the ball in the air a ton this season against right-handers. Bogarts, Machado, Tatis are all ground ball hitters. So I don't know. Obviously they have enough power to go off against anybody, and they're fine. But if they are the chalkiest stack on the slate, I will just pivot that elsewhere and take the lower ownership discount.
Yeah. All right. So the next stack, as far as ownership would be the Nationals. Their game is a little bit dicey as far as weather is concerned. It's got the orange yellow at Roto Grinders via Kevin Roth. So we don't know. We don't know where that's going to land, whether it just be a delay or actually PPD risk. But that kind of makes me not want to go at a chalky offense that could get rained out or have complications. So obviously facing Chris Flexen is appealing. But because they're coming in with ownership and because of the weather, I'm probably off the Nats.
Yeah, it's also just not a very good team.
Right.
So going away from a bad offense that's chalk is, that's a pretty easy argument to make. Flexen has had a pretty staunch reverse split fly ball rate over the years. But so far this season, strikeouts are way down against lefties. So someone like Abrams, I get why he would be popular. He's good and has power and speed upside. Ruiz, Garcia, decent enough hitters. Meneses is hitting high in the lineup, but this is seemingly the chalk offense for people that are going to be playing Kirby and Singer or Yamamoto. And I think there are other cheaper teams you can go with that aren't going to be double-digit owned. So it's fine. I understand it. Good park for them too, but just because the ownership, I'm likely to be underweight, not even factoring in the weather.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Cardinals, and then obviously the Astros. They were the second chalkiest stack earlier in the day. They're coming here rounding out fourth. They are kind of interesting just because they are somewhat flying under the radar despite being in a smash spot, and then you have to raise that Fenway. So looking at those next three teams in line here as far as ownership goes, how are you feeling about the Cardinals, Astros, and Rays?
As of now, Tampa Bay and St. Louis are my third and fourth highest owned stacks, but It's only noon Pacific, so that could and probably will change. But find enough spots. I mentioned Soriano being kind of wild in addition to having strikeout stuff. St. Louis has just also been really bad, and their salaries have come down as a result. Like Goldie's 4K. He's probably washed, but he's 4K. Newt Bar 3.9, Burleson 3K flat, Gorman for 3.4, Carpenter for 2.5 hit leadoff yesterday. Donovan's only 4.1. Like, it's pretty easy to get to them and expensive pitching. And they do get a part boost going into Anaheim. So I'm a bit concerned if they're going to be somewhat popular, but like you said, ownership should be pretty spread out. I am looking to get to them on this slate. The Rays at Fenway, I feel like I always get to whenever they go to Fenway. It's not a very imposing lineup either, but Crawford is a reverse splits righty. Righty power at Fenway is what you want. Rosarena, Paredes, and Diaz, pretty good power hitters. Otherwise, the lineup is just gross, but Harold Ramirez is affordable. Josh Lowe, a decent enough hitter, hitting presumably second or third from the left side. I think it's okay. I'm not going to love getting that. Like, if they pop into lineups, I'm going to be like, okay, I'll play them just because it's a good park, but I don't have a ton of confidence in the Rays just because it doesn't look like a very good stack on paper, but I get it.
Well, this projected lineup does not strike out. They do walk, and they get 10 plus mile an hour winds going out at Fenway. So that's enough for me. I like the Rays the most out of all the stacks on this slate. For those reasons, and also because they are not among the top 3 chalkiest stacks. So once you get past the first 2 at that 6+% range, I think you can just forget about ownership and just do whatever you want to do. So the Rays falling in that like the 5% range on a 12-game slate is very, very appealing to me. So I like them the most. I feel like the Astros, the Astros always look good to me, and every single time they're like chalky, they fucking suck. They just do. They get like 1 run or 2 runs or none. It's never good. So I'm sure they'll be fine. They're in a good spot. But yeah, I like the Rays a lot. All right, so moving on past the really chalky ones, let's dip down a little bit. If you notice Cleveland and Arizona here at 5% too, if you want to comment on them, go ahead. By the way, I do like Arizona a little bit. But coming down here, you mentioned the Halos. I actually like the Halos a little bit. These are stacks that are coming in under 5%. Obviously, the one that stands out the most to me would be Texas with a 4.62 projected run total. And they're facing our boy, Tanner Bybee, who's been having a really rough year. So I like Texas a good amount here, especially since they're flying way under the radar. How do you feel about the Rangers? And is there anybody else in this range, just under 5% projected stack ownership, that is appealing to you today?
I thought I would be getting to more Arizona, but I think it might be a salary thing. Like, it's a pretty expensive lineup on DK, so perhaps that's why I'm not, just because it looks like I'm paying up for pitching for the most part in non-Vasquez lineups, obviously. My 2 highest owned stacks are near the bottom of that list. They're Atlanta, number 1, and Oakland, number 2. I think the Atlanta thing is interesting just because Imanaga's been like unhittable, but his underlying stuff says that he's due for some regression. He's probably not a gas can, obviously. He's going to be pretty good, but he's likely not as good as he's looked so far, and it is Atlanta. Imanaga's had a pretty good run of easy matchups too. So I do think the projections might be a bit like they're underrating him a little bit. So I'd like to push down Atlanta if I can, but if I'm paying up, it looks like I'm getting to them just because they have so much righty power between Acuna, Albies, Olsen, Duvall, Arcia, Riley. It's just a very talented lineup that's been kind of underperforming, and I don't think anyone's going to play them. So that's pretty interesting to me. As for cheap, I think Oakland, I mentioned against Arrighetti just because he's not great, and there's a control issue there. Park upgrade for Oakland. Among the cheap stacks, I'd rather get to the A's than the Nationals.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Yeah, I always like the Braves and the Dodgers when they are coming in with no ownership. So I'm right there with you. It's even more appealing for the Braves when they're facing a good pitcher. So nobody's going to want to stack them up, especially since they're not cheap. All right, as we come down here, we're looking at some stacks that are low owned for a reason. Obviously, the Giants are at home in a pitcher park against Dodgers. That doesn't sound great. The Royals are going up against Kirby. I do think they are a little bit interesting. I'm not going to really go there, but I'll just say that Kirby imploded last time, and he's chalky. So if you want to gain instant leverage, the Royals are not the worst way to try to do that. It's not like we're attacking – well, it's not like we're stacking the Twins. It's like we're trying to attack Kirby that way and hope for, snowball's chance in hell kind of thing. But I think they're viable in tournaments. You could say the same thing for the Rockies just because the guy they're facing is going to be owned. But really, I'm not seeing anything down there that looks amazing. The only thing that does stand out would be Boston, just because they have a good projected run total of 4.42, and they are in Fenway with the wind blowing out. Is there anybody else down here that you are interested
in? It doesn't look like it. I'm not getting to these teams for the most part below Atlanta on that list. The Mets are most unstacked. Giants, Mariners, Royals, Rockies, Red Sox all toward the bottom along with San Diego. Cincinnati is a team we haven't talked about that I think looks pretty good against Montgomery. It's not a park upgrade for them, but Montgomery's been pretty bad. Might be rusty to start the year. Strikeout rate very low against righties. There will throw quite a few righties his way in this game, and I'm not really concerned about Cincy's ownership. So among the teams in that game, I am going to get to more of the Reds, it looks like. And then the Pirates, I think, against Colin Ray look interesting. Park upgrade for them. Ray against lefties in particular is really bad. Pittsburgh has 3 or 4 right in the middle of the lineup, look pretty good. O'Neill Cruz being the headliner. I think the Pirates are worth a shout on this slate.
Yeah. Ray's not good, and major park upgrade. I don't hate that at all. Maybe a little bit of rowdy revenge if he's in the starting lineup. Pirates actually look kind of good. To your point about the Reds, yeah, I mean, their projected lineup as far as their ISO goes doesn't look like it pops off the board or anything. Ellie De La Cruz, 0.02 ISO or 0.092 ISO against lefties. But Jordan Montgomery, 8% K rate against righties this year, 235 ISO allowed. So not good. So Tyler Stevenson, Spencer Steer, maybe even Luke Mail if he gets in there, and obviously Jonathan India. You can also go Ellie De La Cruz, who can hit both sides of the plate. All those guys look good, so I like the Reds too. That just about does it. I think that does it for us, right? We touched on. Is there any other stack or arm that you were highlighting for the day that you wanted to touch on, or you think we're good?
No, I think we've gone through most of them. Obviously, LA is a team you can stack every night, even if they're in a pitcher's park against a decent pitcher. But if I'm paying up, it looks like I'm more likely to pay for Atlanta or Houston on the slate.
Yeah, I think because the ownership is so spread out, personally, I'm just going to go and stick to like that 3-4 pitchers that we're both pretty high on. Yamamoto, Kirby, Singer, Vasquez, and I think you pointed out one other one. You like a little bit of Manaea, right?
Just because he's affordable and it's a good park, and the Phillies lineup's a little bit watered down right now. But
okay. Not with but he is cheap. I'll give you that. But I personally would stay with those top 4 guys that we discussed. I don't really care that they're chalky because as long as you don't put like the major chalk stacks, Padres and who's the other one? Nationals, which I don't want to do. I think you're getting plenty different with the other stacks you use. All right, so that is going to do it for us. Hopefully we helped you out. If we did, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. By the way, we do have an NBA video up on the channel. It's going to probably be at the end of this video, but if not, go to the channel and check it out. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.